So, hey everyone, really excited for another episode of Manly Combos. We actually have Layla that's coming back on the session today. We're really excited. So, today we're going to discuss the presentation of depression and stress in men. And so, Layla has a lot of background and expertise in this. So, I will pass it off to her for her to give a quick introduction on herself and her experience. And then we can kind of start the topic. So, yeah, Layla, would you mind giving a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm Layla, trainee clinical psychologist, doing my doctorate to qualify as a psychologist, my second year, and I've worked for many years with children and families, primarily like fostering and adoption work and in schools. And then since I started the training doctorate, I've spent a year in a crisis adult mental health placement, and then again another children's team for 6 months, and at the moment I'm working with older adults above 70 years old, with mental health interventions and people with dementia.
Very interesting. Well, I know that when I asked you to be on the show the first time, you sent a bunch of interesting topics to discuss. And I remember you asked me for this one, what was I interested in? And it really kind of resonated with me about, how you want to talk about the presentation of depression and distress in men, because it is something that is a little bit different and not something that we probably all can be aware of, because we're not, a lot of times men are not very forthcoming with their emotions and what they're feeling. So it'd be good to get, could you give a kind of little bit of understanding of, why did you want to talk about this topic, and what are, I guess, what are some of the differences that you see between men and women in showing emotions?
I think kind of based on what we'd spoken about last time, so maybe hopefully some of the foundation of why some of these things may be the case, but I really notice just kind of anecdotally of working with adults in the crisis team last year who experienced like really severe kind of mental health crisis, suicidal thoughts, psychosis, lots of kind of really I guess severe presentations of distress psychologically. I picked up a lot of kind of, I guess, reflections and thinking about experiences of how different it was working with some of the female clients compared to some of the male clients, but also seeing some of these things at really early years that were kind of like the starting blocks, I guess, working with kids, particularly young boys and teenage boys, about how I may see it quite differently compared to the girls I worked with. Yeah, and I guess growing up, like a lot of observations around like people in my own life and why that may be the case. I think it's so important, I really do, and I don't think it's talked about how, I guess, a lot of the hopefully things we'll talk about today, we're kind of looking past a lot of things, I think, and we know that like suicide rates for men are so much higher in terms of completed suicides, that it's like it's screaming out in statistics. And I think we're like kind of bumbling around with questions, and I guess there's like an action for a lot of us in society to think beyond, I guess, simplistic views of some of these things, if you see where I'm coming from.
No, definitely. So I guess what are some ways that you see that men and women, show emotions around? I guess if you want to start off with depression or distress, whichever one you want to take it, but I guess what are the things that you notice the most?
Yes, typically, I guess this is anecdotally from my experience, but also kind of backed up by research, is that stereotypically, I guess, because of how differences in kind of how women and men are kind of brought up and raised and interact with society, that stereotypically it may be that women might show more kind of internalizing symptoms of distress and like kind of act in problems within themselves, as in like things that may be low mood, self-esteem issues, depression, kind of social withdrawal, things that may look like, I guess, on the surface, like these things are happening internally and kind of being within one person, things like, I guess, thinking about distress like located within the person, what they're kind of going through within themselves, compared to men typically more likely to kind of externalize and act out distress in ways that we know may not kind of see as communicating distress. So things like, I guess, irritability, aggression and anger, and things like kind of recklessness, impulsiveness, and things that are more sort of outward facing, I guess, than what we may stereotypically kind of think of as like a lay understanding of distress. So I can see this in kids and teens and adults, there seems to be common threads. It's not like a one size fits all approach, but just thinking maybe somehow some of the more complexities of presentations might be there for some people.
Great. No. And so if you were to look at that, I guess, if you're to kind of break that down, I guess, how might, if we're to look more just for really go into men, I guess, are there differences at age brackets for men or anything like that? Or is it kind of, you see very similar patterns across, for teenagers, adults, things like that? What is it that you're noticing?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting to think about like gender as a concept with kids, because I don't think it's really until, and like don't quote me on this, but like 3, 4, 5-year-olds that gender starts to become a thing, and
Yeah.
people start to like separate by gender. It'd be a real kind of like concrete and physical way that children separate and say, oh, I'm a boy because I have short hair, or I'm a girl because I wear dresses. So kind of before that age, it doesn't seem to be a massive like separation and distinction. And like even, I guess, just thinking in the UK, schools used to be split. Like boys would go to this school, girls would go to that school, really separate, and like they'd have different kind of education classes. Whereas now, thankfully, it's more integrated. But it's almost like there's kind of, I don't know, in my own mind, it feels like there's almost like a different trajectory that boys and girls are kind of set on in terms of like their emotions and I guess their well-being at a certain age, around that kind of primary school age, where they start to think, okay, for men, for young boys, it may be right, okay, this is the time where like I don't continue opening up. Like I don't want to be seen as like a mummy's boy, as weak and as I guess too close to my friends. Whereas girls, it's like if you look around the age group of like late primary, early secondary, like hands up, I was like all involved in like social groups, and like that was really important. And like I compare my own experiences of like primary and secondary compared to like boys that actually like just going in two different directions a lot of the time. And then I guess it feeds into like adulthood, whereas like men typically have maybe friendships on a level, but it's based around like kind of shared activities and whatnot, whereas females may typically have friends that like it, they really value like the shared connection, the confiding in each other, sharing. So yeah, it's almost like the kind of early signs may be there at that age, but I think it's like we're almost like programming kids to go down these different paths.
So the thing that, because I think a lot of the people listening to this are most like, well, they might have children or they're adults. And for men that are adults, because I've unfortunately have had friends who've gone through depression, and some of them have taken action for it and not in the right way. And I guess as an adult, what is it that you can do, or things you can notice for or pay attention to see if you have depression or distress? Because people might not be able to self-diagnose. And I guess to add to that, besides being able to self-diagnose, I guess, what are things that they could really do to try to help them, make sure that they're not going down a unhealthy path?
Yeah, so kind of like preventing things. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot around like maybe barriers to like understanding your emotional experience on some level, maybe like a bit of a sign, and that almost it's like you're kind of going through as like a flatness, and that things are just like you're just doing things to get just through the day, like running on autopilot. And there was a really nice quote I heard once, I can't remember what it's from, about like it was a guy describing his experience of emotions and saying like he feels like in the world that women have, this whole colouring box of like varied colours, like reds, yellows, greens, blues, to describe their emotion. And as a guy, he's been given like black, grey and white, like really limited understanding of like what's going on for him. I can't remember where I heard this, might have been a podcast. I thought that was just so interesting to think about, like it's this kind of limitation of how some people may see it as just like, okay, I'm just sad, I'm just happy, and that there's like a real variation of like emotional experience within that. I think it shows up in so many different ways when someone's starting to kind of go downhill. It could be like a kind of notice that something's out of habit with them. They may not have reacted to a situation in the best way, and they're like, why did that come from? Like these kind of alarm bells of like, I don't usually speak to my partner like that. I don't usually scream at my kids. I don't usually like, I don't know, throw myself into work as much as I am. I think it's about like this kind of introspection, like looking inside yourself and thinking about, is this my norm? And like, am I living a life that I'm like wanting to live rather than just being here to like exist? Yeah, there's something about like kind of meaning and purpose and what's driving you rather than just like existing to just like kind of stay alive and have like such a bleak kind of life experience, I think. Yeah.
And to add to that, I guess, what do you think a friend can do, male or female, that has a friend, a male friend going through depression or distress? What are things that, I don't know, you might be repeating yourself. What are things that we need to look at? And also, what can we do? Because it's always this tricky thing. It's, how do you really handle this? How do you help and support and things like that?
Yeah, I think no, it's important to check in, definitely. And I think that can be really simple ways. And it's kind of like the approach that seems to really matter, probably like approaching things with like a curiosity and like a kind of non-judgment, like, hey, just to check in, like I think things have like seem a bit different with you, or I've noticed that we used to hang out a lot more. What's going on? So kind of framing it as like a place of like your concern. So if I'm concerned about you, rather than going, Corey, like you seem really off, but being like, Corey, I've been worried about you, like, or something like that, conveying it from a place of like concern rather than putting someone in a defensive position, particularly maybe a male. I don't know that it might be, but yeah, it definitely can be both genders, but thinking about how to convey it and also being like, this comes from a place where like, I want you to take steps. It might not be therapy or something like an intervention, but is it just like we schedule in something, we get out and about, whatever it may be. Yeah, rather than I guess like a group kind of intervention from friends, thinking about maybe on an individual level that is coming from like a place of compassion. I think we tend to do that quite naturally, and I think the other person hopefully on the other end will receive it as just that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like women probably do that a little bit more naturally than men do.
Yeah.
And not I know. And I think it's one of those things with your male friends. I think one thing that it's like very different, but I lost my mom when I was 25. And I remember at the time I didn't go to therapy. I wasn't going to go to therapy. My mother was battling because one, I was young, and two, I didn't believe in therapy at the time.
Yeah.
And then funny enough, I had a dinner with a friend last night whose mother is battling cancer for the second time. And, I said to him, I go, and I didn't know, he's kind of a new friend to me. And I said to him, I go, listen, the only advice I can really give you is that, one, don't be afraid to talk to people about it. I go, not that you need to tell everybody all the time. I go, but people that you are close with, don't feel like you need to go through this experience on your own. And also, I go, I'm going to say this. I go, I think therapy is not something you should wait until. And he goes, well, actually, I go to therapy. I was like, oh, that's great. I go, so that's a huge thing. I go, but don't be afraid to let your friends know that, one, you want support, but also vice versa. One thing I would say to, if you have a friend going through something, is sometimes all they need to hear is, like, you say to them, be like, hey, listen, like, I don't know what you're going through. You don't have to talk to me about it, but I just want you to know that if you just want someone to talk to about it or vent or whatever it is, you can always message me or call me, or whatever it may be.
Right.
And it's interesting how that usually, and the person might not respond immediately, but if you say it, every once in a while, people know that you're there and just, willing to support. That has a huge impact on people. Because a lot of times people, again, I've never had depression, but I've gone through something that was quite tough, losing my mom at a young age, was that I always felt that nobody understood what I was going through. And in defense to my friends, we were all young. So we were 23, 24. So, and very different. But I think that's something that people don't know what to do and actually don't need to do much.
Yeah, but I think it's nice how it's kind of you sharing part of your vulnerable self to sort of break that barrier a little bit with him and just be like, like, this is what's happened in my life. This is kind of how I approached it. Like, I really struggled. I get how you're struggling, that type of thing, rather than like, so kind of opening up a bit of yourself and like your own experience and seeing you on kind of the other side of that.
Definitely. Well, you and I were messaging the other day, and I have it written down here. And this was it's not something I've ever heard or know about, but you were saying, Matt, there's this UCLA loneliness scale, and you were saying that basically they're talking about, are there any differences in genders on social connection and loneliness? So what is that? What is that about? It's sounding quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one that I picked up when I was working with people in the crisis team, that reflections around like how men's felt experience of kind of social connection and loneliness came up quite a lot in work, and thinking about I guess I delved into that a little bit because I was quite curious about that, because it's something that's such a profound experience. Like you can be in a room with people, but you can feel so like kind of chronically lonely. It's not just about people around you, it's like this internal experience of isolation. So I looked into it, and what it basically, research has shown that loneliness is like a predictive factor, well, not entirely a predictive factor, but like a risk factor for depression, for as well, and that obviously social connection, friendship, belonging is a real like crucial factor in positive mental health. So I looked into this study that basically said when asked to answer the question, are you lonely? Really direct question. Women are more likely to answer yes to it than men. Okay. But then when they did they drafted and kind of trialed this questionnaire that looks at like really key aspects, like drilling down into loneliness as a construct, it was actually men that scored higher for loneliness. So I have the questionnaire. I thought I'd bring it out.
Great.
Just looking at like there's 20 questions, and I'd love to hear like your reflections on it. Would you read it?
Yeah, please. That's great.
So you have 20 questions, so you can sit down and do it yourself. And it's you answer, I often feel this way, I sometimes feel this way, I rarely feel this way, I never feel this way. So you have to both men and women in like a really large.
So sometimes I feel this way. Say that again.
Often, I sometimes feel this way, I rarely feel this way, and I never feel this way. So there's 4 kind of points. So like often being the highest and never being the lowest. So it's like a rating system.
Okay. Are we going to do this with me now? You can ask me the questions.
No, I don't have to ask you it. It's fine.
Oh, no, you can ask me. I was like, oh, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Let's do it.
No, never even heard of this thing before.
I can message you a start.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, I'm unhappy doing so many things alone.
I'm unhappy doing so many things alone.
Often, sometimes, rarely, never.
I would say rarely, never. But also, I'm also a little bit, I think I'm a little bit skewed on this thing. So I've traveled a lot on my own. Like I've done a lot of things on my own since I've been 25. So I think that might be a little skewed in an answer. So, but I do like doing things with friends. It's weird. I'm a huge extrovert, but that's just my nature. But also I do like having time to myself to think and reflect and stuff like that. So
that sounds balanced. Yeah. I have nobody to talk to.
Rarely, never.
I cannot tolerate being so alone.
So alone. No, really, never.
I lack companionship.
I guess how do they define companionship? Does that mean friendship or relationship? Friendship. No, I don't think I lack companionship with friends like that. Yeah. From a friendship perspective, no. From a romantic perspective, yeah, I haven't had a girlfriend in a long time. But I'm getting a dog. So.
That's a companion. I know. I can't wait to hear how you get on with your dog.
But I guess if you're going to combine the two, I would say, what was the middle one?
Oh, so it's often, sometimes, rarely, never.
Oh, I was combining rarely, never. No, I would say probably rarely, never.
Okay. They said dog's a man's best friend, right? I feel as if nobody really understands me.
Never.
I find myself waiting for people to call all right.
I would say often, but that's because I'm super communicative more than most people. so I probably message and call more than most people do in the world. So yeah.
There is no one I can turn to.
Never.
I am no longer close to anyone. My interests and ideas are not shared by those around me.
Rarely, never.
I feel left out.
Never.
I feel completely alone. I'm unable to reach out and communicate with those around me.
Never.
My social relationships are superficial.
I would say in London, it's rarely never, because it can happen where you just have friends who you go out just to have a good time with. So that's a superficial friendship. So yeah.
I feel starved for company. No one really knows me well. I feel isolated from others.
Never.
I am unhappy being so withdrawn.
Being so withdrawn. Never.
It is difficult for me to make friends.
Never.
I feel shut
out. Again, I think it depends on how you define friendship. Because living in London, I think it's easy to make friends, but like how you define friendship. Like,
like quality, maybe.
Yeah, like true friendship where, like in England where you don't have to drink 10 pints to talk about things.
Yeah.
That's a different thing. So to have like proper friendship where you can be
Mhm.
open, honest, vulnerable, and all those things without having to drink, which I don't really drink much anymore. I would say, I'd say it's almost like 50-50 in this country. But I would say
Mm.
I have a lot of close friends where I can be very open and honest about it.
Yeah.
But I could see why it could be difficult for
Interesting.
men, especially for men. I could see why it's difficult to, in my opinion, how I define friendship, get to that level.
And I remember you saying that you tend to have more female friends. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably say in England, where I've lived 3.5 years, I'd probably say 65-70% of my close friends are women,
Okay.
which isn't really surprising when you talk about the things you're talking about today, how women are just naturally more open and expressive and emotional, and you can just talk about things. So, and even though I am I correlate as a guy, but I'm not someone who talks about like sports all the time and all these other things, and so
Mm.
it's so I can go to that as well.
Yeah. Oh, I had a question for you at the end that I've just come up with.
Okay,
People are around me, but they're not with me.
rarely, never.
Okay. So you've gone against the grain, Corey. There's the
What?
first pause. You've gone against the grain of the study.
Well, but actually, that the reason why though is because I've done a lot of work. I've done therapy for not 10 years straight, but 12
Yeah,
years
yeah.
straight. But I've done a lot of it, and yeah, I think yeah, I think also I'm very luckily my natural
Mm,
personality is an extrovert, and like my also inherent way of being is to naturally trust people.
yeah.
And so like now, if there's certain things I notice about someone that I don't like about their character, I might not befriend them very quickly. Like for me, my dad said to me as a kid, he goes, you are the people that you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And so, and I very wholeheartedly believe that statement.